My stepdaughter Madison begged to borrow my grandmother's heirloom ring for a TikTok trend, then pawned it to buy a $2,000 prom dress. When I discovered the receipt in her trash, I took the dress from the boutique and wore it as a prom chaperone. Imagine your own stepdaughter not only steals your most precious family heirloom for a prom dress, but then systematically tries to destroy your life. Well, that's exactly what Madison did to me. And trust me, her prom night was just the first taste of what was coming. Let me tell you, that ring wasn't just jewelry. It was my grandmother's, a symbol of enduring love. She used to joke that if I ever found a man like my grandfather, the one who put that ring on her finger the day he came back from the war, I should use it too. When Andrew reconnected with me after 20 years, after our college romance broke up when our careers split us across the country, it felt like destiny. We were older, divorced, but still drawn to each other like magnets. He proposed to me on top of Mount Kilimanjaro with that very ring, and I cried harder than I ever expected. Life for the first time in a long time felt perfect. Except for one thing, Andrew's 2 daughters. There was Sophie, seemingly sweet and warm, but then there was Madison. Madison, the blunt 16-year-old tornado, who made it crystal clear from day one that I was not welcome. Her eyes would roll at every compliment, her snide comments about my clothes would cut, and when I brought cupcakes to her school fundraiser, she actually threw them away, telling everyone I was just a wannabe Pinterest mom. It hurt, but I kept trying. I desperately wanted us to be a family. I took her shopping, helped with school applications. Even when she'd snap, "You're trying too hard," I wouldn't give up. Then a month before prom, Madison started venting. The dress she wanted was ridiculously expensive, way out of her budget. Andrew told her she'd have to pay the difference herself. She exploded, pouting, slamming doors, screaming it was unfair, that I had money but never offered to help her. One night, Madison came into the living room, tears streaming down her face, holding the velvet box of my grandmother's ring. "Can I wear it for a TikTok trend?" she sniffled. "I promise I'll be careful." It was the first time I'd ever seen her vulnerable, and she even called me by my name, not Step. My guard dropped. I took the ring off my finger and said yes. She seemed so happy, she hugged me tightly, thanking me over and over. She even got me takeout that night. I truly believed this one small action would snowball into a beautiful bond between us. I was so wrong. The next morning the ring was gone. Madison cried, saying she must have misplaced it. I tore the house apart, frantic, searching everywhere. But Andrew? He barely blinked. "It's just a ring," he said casually. "I can get you another one." My heart shattered. It wasn't just a ring. That night I sat on the cold bathroom floor, clutching the empty velvet box, staring until my eyes burned. I was crushed, distraught. Then 3 days later I heard Madison on the phone. Her voice, sharp and cold, cut through the house. "Yeah, she totally bought it," she sneered. "Stupid cow, probably thinks it's sentimental. I sold it yesterday." My blood ran cold. I didn't move. And then she said it. "I'm going to look so hot in this dress. Worth every penny." No way. My ring. For a prom dress? Wanting to be absolutely sure, I waited until she left for school, then tore her room apart. There in her wastebasket was the receipt. A pawn shop. For a ring. I broke down, sobbing. Andrew came upstairs and saw me. I thrust the receipt into his hand, but he just sighed. "She's just a kid. She's stolen from me in the past. She didn't mean to." She didn't mean to. We argued for an hour, but it was clear he wouldn't help, so I went to the pawn shop alone. The guy remembered her. "Madison Delancey," he said. He handed me the transaction receipt, then delivered the gut punch. The ring was already gone. Sold. Nothing he could do unless it was reported stolen. I nodded, thanked him, and walked out. That's when my plan began. I drove straight to the boutique where Madison's dress was being altered. "I'm here to pick up Madison Delancey's dress," I said, giving her full name and order number. The clerk didn't even question it. She just handed it over in a garment bag. I took it home, hung it neatly in my closet. Then I called Madison's school and volunteered to chaperone prom. I said I was a step-parent, had event experience, and was happy to help. They were thrilled. The day before prom, Madison tore through the house, screaming and cursing. "Where's my dress?" She turned the place upside down, convinced someone had stolen it. She had a meltdown so loud the neighbors peeked out their windows. In the end, she had to buy one off the rack. It didn't fit right. Bunched in some places, loose in others. Still, she tried to carry herself like a queen. But then prom night came. I arrived an hour early, my name on the chaperone list, hair done, heels on. And I walked in wearing her dress. The exact dress she'd bought with the money from my grandmother's ring. I stood by the punch table greeting kids with a serene smile. When Madison walked in and saw me, she froze. The color drained from her face. Her friends whispered. She looked down at her ill-fitting backup dress, then turned away. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. It wasn't about the dress anymore. It wasn't even just about the ring. It was about showing someone who tries to humiliate you, who you only ever wanted to love, exactly what it feels like to lose. But I wasn't done teaching her a lesson just yet. I watched Madison storm out of the gym, her friends trailing behind her. The satisfaction wasn't cruel, just a quiet sense of balance, like finally setting a crooked picture frame straight. The rest of prom was a blur of punch refills and confiscated flasks. I kept my distance from Madison, letting her stew in her embarrassment. Other chaperones complimented the dress, asking where I got it. I just smiled and changed the subject. When I got home, Andrew was waiting, looking utterly exhausted, rubbing his temples like he always did when stressed. I hung up my coat, still in Madison's dress, and sat across from him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again, struggling to find the words. Finally, he just shook his head and went upstairs. The silence that filled the house was louder than any argument could have been. The next morning, Madison wouldn't come out of her room. I could hear her on the phone through the door, her voice shaking with pure rage. Around noon, Sophie knocked on my bedroom door, peeking in with an unreadable expression. She asked if we could talk. I patted the bed beside me. She sat, tucking her legs underneath her, staring at her hands. Then quietly she told me she knew about the ring. She'd known for weeks. Madison had bragged about it, even shown her the cash. My chest tightened with a fresh wave of pain. Sophie explained everything. Madison's tears, the hug, even the takeout. All calculated to make me drop my guard. Sophie had tried to talk her out of it, but Madison wouldn't listen. Sophie left my room without another word. But her confession changed everything. The house felt charged with an electricity I couldn't quite name. Madison finally emerged that evening, eyes red and puffy. She walked past me in the kitchen without a word, grabbing leftovers. I tried to go about my routine, but everything felt off-kilter. Andrew barely spoke to me, communicating only in grunts and nods. Madison's silence was somehow louder than her usual complaints. Even Sophie seemed to retreat, spending more time at friends' houses. 3 days after prom, I came home to find my jewelry box overturned on the bed. Nothing was missing, but everything was scattered. My grandmother's pearls, my mother's bracelet, strewn across the comforter. Someone had been searching for something specific. I gathered everything, my hands trembling. This wasn't random. Madison was looking for another valuable to sell, or perhaps just reminding me she could get into my things anytime she wanted. That night, I installed a lock on our bedroom door. Andrew noticed but didn't comment. The distance between us grew wider with each passing day. He started working late, missing dinners. When he was home, he buried himself in his phone or disappeared into his study. Madison's behavior shifted. No more eye rolls. Now she watched me with calculating eyes, like a chess player planning her next move. She started being overly polite, offering to help with dishes, asking about my day. It made my skin crawl. A week later, I found my car keyed in the driveway. Long, deliberate scratches down the driver's side. No proof it was Madison, of course. Andrew suggested it was random vandalism. I didn't argue. Just called the insurance company and got it fixed. Then came the social media posts. Madison started sharing old photos of her and Andrew with captions like "missing the old days" or "when it was just us." Friends and family liked and commented, totally unaware of the context. Andrew's sister even called to check on our marriage. I tried talking to Andrew, but he brushed it off as typical teenage behavior. He said she was just processing the changes in her life. I wanted to scream that she was manipulating him, manipulating everyone, but I knew how that would sound. Sophie continued to be a wild card. Some days she was sympathetic, offering small gestures of support. Other days she'd align with Madison, whispering in corners, going silent when I entered the room. I couldn't figure out where her loyalties truly lay. The house became a battlefield of passive aggression. Madison would move my things just slightly, enough to notice but not enough to complain about. My coffee mug in the wrong cabinet. My phone charger disappearing, then reappearing in random places. Small violations that added up to a constant state of unease. I started documenting everything. Photos of my belongings before I left the house. A journal of every incident, no matter how minor. I felt paranoid, but I needed evidence if things escalated further. 2 weeks after prom, Madison made her next real move. I came home to find her crying on the couch, Andrew's arm around her. When they saw me, Madison's tears intensified. She claimed I'd been sending her threatening texts, telling her I would ruin her life like she ruined mine. I froze. Of course I hadn't sent any texts. But Madison had her phone out, showing Andrew messages from my number. Cruel, vindictive messages I would never write. My hands went cold as I realized what she'd done. Technology wasn't my strong suit, but even I knew there were apps that could fake text messages. I tried to explain, but Madison's tears were far more convincing than my protests. He looked at me with disappointment, maybe even disgust. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because Andrew asked me to, but because I couldn't bear to lie next to someone who thought I was capable of threatening his child. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how everything had spiraled so far out of control. The next morning, I did something I probably should have done weeks ago. I called the pawn shop again. I asked if they had security footage from the day Madison sold the ring. The owner said they kept recordings for 30 days. I was cutting it close, but he agreed to let me review them. I drove there immediately, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The footage was grainy but clear enough. There was Madison, handing over my grandmother's ring, counting the cash with a satisfied smile. I asked for a copy. The owner burned it onto a disc for me. Armed with this evidence, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe now Andrew would see the truth about his daughter. Maybe we could finally address the real problem instead of dancing around it. I drove home, the disc burning a hole in my passenger seat. But when I pulled into the driveway, Madison's car was gone. Sophie was sitting on the front steps, looking troubled. She stood as I approached, wringing her hands, and my stomach dropped. Madison had gone to stay with her mother for a while, Sophie explained. Said she couldn't live in a house where she felt threatened and unwelcome. Andrew had driven her there himself, and would be back later to talk about our situation. I felt the disc in my hand suddenly useless. Madison had outmaneuvered me again, painting herself as the victim fleeing an abusive stepmother. The evidence I'd gathered would look like desperation now, like I was obsessed with punishing a child. Sophie surprised me then. She said she was tired of Madison's games, tired of being pulled between us. She knew what her sister was capable of. She'd watched her manipulate people for years. But she also loved her sister and didn't know how to stop enabling her. We sat on the steps together, an unlikely alliance forming. Sophie told me about other things Madison had done. Stolen money from their mother, spread rumors about a teacher who gave her a bad grade, always managing to come out looking innocent. As the sun set, I realized this was far from over. Madison might be at her mother's now, but she would be back. And when she returned, she would be planning something bigger. The prom dress had been my first move, reactive and emotional. I needed to be smarter, more strategic. Andrew came home as darkness fell, his face grim. He said we needed to talk about boundaries, about respect, about making Madison feel safe in her own home. I listened to his prepared speech, noting how carefully he avoided mentioning the ring or the pawn shop. When he finished, I simply nodded. There would be time for evidence later. For now, I needed to play a longer game. Madison had taught me that sometimes the direct approach wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to be patient, strategic, willing to wait for the right moment. As Andrew headed upstairs, Sophie caught my eye from the hallway. She gave me a small nod and I understood. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Madison might have won this round, but the game was far from over. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, planning my next move. The dress had been reactive, emotional. What I needed now was something calculated. Something that would expose Madison's true nature without making me look like the villain. The pieces were all there. The security footage, Sophie's testimony, the undeniable pattern of behavior. I just needed to figure out how to use them effectively, how to protect myself and my marriage while helping Madison face real consequences for her actions. As I climbed the stairs to bed, I paused outside Madison's empty room. The space still smelled like her perfume, too sweet, too cloying. I closed the door softly, a new plan beginning to form in my mind. She thought she had won by running to her mother's, but all she had done was give me time to prepare. When she came back, and she would come back, I would be ready. This time I wouldn't just be defending myself. This time I would be teaching her a lesson she would never forget. Madison returned after 5 days at her mother's house. I watched from the kitchen window as Andrew helped her carry bags inside. His movements so careful, so protective. She wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her chin tilted up in defiance. The moment she crossed the threshold, I felt the atmosphere shift. The house itself seemed to brace for impact. Sophie had been my only companion during Madison's absence, though she kept her distance too. We exchanged meaningful glances but rarely spoke. I understood her position, caught between loyalty to her sister and knowing the truth. The security footage disc remained hidden in my dresser drawer, waiting for the right moment. That first evening back, Madison moved through the house like she owned it. She rearranged the living room furniture while I was cooking dinner, pushing my favorite reading chair into a corner, centering everything around the television. When I came out to set the table, she was sprawled across the couch, feet up on the coffee table I'd refinished myself. Andrew emerged from his study just as I was about to speak. He surveyed the room, noticed the changes, and simply asked what was for dinner. The message was clear. Madison was to be given space to feel comfortable. My comfort was negotiable. During dinner, Madison picked at her food, making faces at every bite. She pushed her plate away dramatically, then got up to make herself a sandwich with the expensive deli meat I'd been saving for Andrew's work lunches. I watched her use nearly half the package, layering it thick, all while maintaining eye contact with me. After dinner, I found my laptop moved from my desk to the floor beside it. My papers were shuffled, some crumpled. My favorite pen was missing. When I went to charge my phone, the cord had been cut clean through with scissors. Small violations, each one calculated to provoke a reaction. I replaced the charging cord without comment, straightened my papers, retrieved my laptop. Each time I fixed something, Madison watched from doorways, waiting for me to explode. But I'd learned from our first round. Emotional reactions gave her ammunition. So I remained calm, methodical, almost cheerful. Sophie started leaving notes in places only I would find them. Tucked inside my pillowcase. Slipped under my coffee mug. They contained information about Madison's plans, warnings about what was coming. Through these secret communications, I learned Madison was documenting everything too, building a case that I was an unfit stepmother. One note warned me to check my social media settings. I discovered Madison had been screenshotting my posts and photos, editing them to make innocent comments seem threatening. She'd even created a folder on the family computer labeled evidence, knowing Andrew would eventually find it. I spent hours going through my online presence, making everything private, deleting anything that could be misconstrued. It felt like erasing myself, becoming smaller and quieter, just to avoid giving her material to twist. But it was necessary. Madison had turned our home into a chess match, and I needed to think several moves ahead. Andrew grew more distant with each passing day. He started sleeping on the couch, claiming his back hurt. He took phone calls in private, whispering with his ex-wife for hours. I heard him apologizing repeatedly, though for what, I couldn't tell. Madison had successfully positioned herself as the victim, and Andrew was buying into the narrative completely. 2 weeks after her return, I woke to find my car wouldn't start. The mechanic found sugar in the gas tank, an old trick but effective. The repair would cost over $1,000. Andrew suggested, "You must have enemies at work, someone playing a prank." He never once looked at Madison when he said it. While my car was in the shop, I had to rely on Andrew for rides. This meant being trapped at home most days, unable to escape the mounting tension. Madison used this time to escalate her campaign. She played music at full volume during my work calls. She accidentally disconnected the internet router while I was in video meetings. She left messes everywhere, knowing I'd have to clean them or live in chaos. Sophie's notes became more urgent. She warned that Madison was planning something bigger, though she didn't know what. She begged me to be careful, to not trust anything at face value. I tucked each note away with the security footage, building my own collection of evidence. One morning I found Madison in my closet, trying on my clothes. She didn't startle when I appeared in the doorway, just continued posing in front of the mirror wearing my favorite blazer. She smoothed the lapels, mentioned how it would look better on someone younger. Then she walked out, still wearing it, daring me to make a scene. I let her keep the blazer. I picked my battles. But I also started moving my valuable items to a storage unit I'd rented without telling Andrew. My grandmother's jewelry, important documents, anything I couldn't bear to lose. I made these trips during my lunch breaks, telling Andrew I was meeting clients. Madison noticed things disappearing and grew bolder. She started wearing my perfume, using my expensive skincare products, taking my books and not returning them. Each theft was a test, pushing boundaries to see when I'd break. But I'd learned patience from her. I'd learned to play the long game. Then Sophie left a note that changed everything. Madison was planning to stage an incident, make it look like I'd physically hurt her. She'd been researching how to create realistic bruises, practicing her story with friends. Sophie didn't know when it would happen, only that Madison was waiting for the perfect moment. I started being extremely careful about being alone with Madison. I kept my phone recording in my pocket during any interaction. I avoided physical proximity, never entering her room, never standing too close. It was exhausting living like a suspect in my own home, but absolutely necessary. Andrew noticed my behavior and misinterpreted it as guilt. He confronted me one evening, accusing me of avoiding his daughter because I'd been caught in my lies. The fake text messages had worked their magic on him. He believed I was capable of threatening a child, and my defensive behavior only confirmed his suspicions. During this confrontation, Madison appeared at the top of the stairs, watching. She'd timed it perfectly, knowing her father would be emotional and susceptible. She came down slowly, tears already forming, and threw herself into his arms. She whispered something I couldn't hear, but Andrew's face darkened as he held her. That night, Andrew asked me to consider staying with a friend for a while. Just until things calmed down, he said. Just until Madison felt safe again. I refused. Leaving would be admitting guilt. This is my home too, I reminded him. We are supposed to be partners. The word partners seemed to anger him. He launched into a speech about priorities, about putting children first, about the sacrifices parents make. He never once mentioned my sacrifices, the way I tried to build a relationship with his daughters, the patience I'd shown in the face of Madison's cruelty. I slept in the guest room again, but barely managed any rest. Every creak of the house made me wonder if Madison was implementing her plan. I kept my door locked, a chair wedged under the handle for extra security. It was like living in a horror movie where the monster was a manipulative teenager. Sophie's notes stopped coming. I worried Madison had discovered our communication and shut it down. Without my early warning system, I felt exposed and vulnerable. I tried catching Sophie's eye, but she avoided me completely, spending most of her time locked in her room or out with friends. Madison grew impatient with my refusal to react. Her provocations became more aggressive. She accidentally spilled red wine on my wedding dress photos. She used my laptop to search disturbing topics, ensuring they'd show up in the browser history Andrew might see. She left fake diary entries lying around, describing fear and anxiety about living with me. I documented everything meticulously, taking photos, keeping records, but I knew it would look obsessive if anyone found it. Madison had successfully painted me as the aggressor, making any defensive action seem like further proof of my instability. It was a masterful manipulation, and I had to admire the strategy, even as it destroyed my life. Andrew started making comments about our future, wondering aloud if we'd rushed into things. He mentioned couples counseling, but only if I admitted to sending those texts first. He wanted me to apologize to Madison, to take responsibility for creating a hostile environment. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but I stayed silent. One afternoon, while Andrew was at work and Madison at school, I found Sophie crying in the backyard. She looked up when I approached, mascara streaking down her cheeks. For a moment I thought she might run, but instead she stayed seated on the garden bench, shoulders shaking. She told me Madison had threatened her. Said she'd make her life miserable if she didn't fall in line. Sophie was scared of her own sister. Had been for years. She'd watched Madison destroy friendships, relationships, anyone who got in her way. But this was different. This was family, and Sophie didn't know how to handle it. I sat beside her, careful not to touch, not to give Madison any ammunition if she was watching from a window. I told Sophie I understood that she didn't have to choose sides. But Sophie shook her head. Said she already had. She was tired of being afraid, tired of enabling Madison's behavior. Sophie revealed that Madison kept a journal hidden in her room, documenting all her schemes. Not the fake one she left lying around, but a real one where she planned her manipulations. Sophie had read it once, seen the calculated cruelty laid out in Madison's own handwriting. She offered to get it for me. I wanted to say yes immediately, but I forced myself to think. If Madison caught Sophie, the retaliation would be swift and brutal. I couldn't put her in that position. Instead, I asked her to just keep watching, to protect herself first. Sophie nodded, wiping her tears, and we parted ways without another word. That evening, Madison announced she was throwing a party for her birthday. She'd already invited everyone, told them her father had approved it. Andrew looked surprised, but didn't contradict her in front of me. Instead, he pulled her aside later, and I heard them negotiating terms. Madison would get her party if she promised to try harder with me. The hypocrisy was stunning. I was expected to apologize for crimes I didn't commit, while Madison got rewarded for her behavior with a party. But I smiled and offered to help plan, playing the role of the trying too hard stepmother. Once again, Madison's eyes narrowed, suspicious of my easy acceptance. As the party planning progressed, Madison made increasingly ridiculous demands. Expensive catering, a DJ, elaborate decorations. Andrew tried to set limits, but Madison would tear up and mention how hard things had been lately, how she just wanted one special day. He caved every time. I volunteered to handle the cake, offering to order from Madison's favorite bakery. She grudgingly accepted, probably because it meant she didn't have to do any work. I placed the order carefully, specifying every detail according to Madison's wishes, but I also made a few special arrangements of my own. Sophie started communicating again, this time through a shared grocery list app on our phones. She'd add items like Madison planning something for party, between milk and bread. It was clever, hiding in plain sight. Through these messages, I learned Madison intended to humiliate me in front of all her friends. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Madison would provoke me during the party, push all my buttons until I snapped. With dozens of teenage witnesses, she'd finally have proof that I was unstable and dangerous. She'd even been coaching her friends on what to say, preparing them to support her version of events. I spent the days before the party in careful preparation. I meditated each morning, practicing calm responses to potential provocations. I planned my outfit carefully, choosing something modest and motherly. I even practiced my smile in the mirror, making sure it never looked forced or fake. Andrew watched my preparations with suspicion. He questioned why I was trying so hard, what I was hoping to accomplish. Every effort I made was twisted into something sinister in his mind. Madison had done her work well, poisoning the foundation of our relationship until trust was impossible. The morning of the party, I woke early to start preparations. Madison had given me a list of tasks, all designed to keep me busy and stressed, but I moved through them methodically, refusing to be rattled. Sophie helped quietly. We worked in companionable silence, understanding each other without words. Madison emerged around noon, inspecting our work with a critical eye. She found fault with everything, demanding changes that would require redoing hours of work. I nodded pleasantly and made the adjustments without complaint. Each time she expected resistance and got compliance, her frustration grew. The cake arrived exactly as ordered, beautiful and elaborate. Madison actually smiled when she saw it. A genuine reaction, before she remembered to be suspicious. I'd ordered extra, ensuring there would be plenty for all her guests. I wanted everything to be perfect, but not for the reasons she assumed. As guests began arriving, Madison transformed into the perfect daughter. She hugged her friends, laughed at their jokes, played the gracious hostess. Several parents stayed to chat, complimenting the party arrangements. Madison made sure to mention loudly that her stepmother had helped, setting the stage for her performance. I circulated among the guests, playing my role perfectly. I was attentive but not overbearing, helpful but not intrusive. Several parents mentioned how lucky Madison was to have such a caring stepmother. I thanked them warmly, noting how Madison's jaw tightened each time she overheard these exchanges. The party progressed smoothly. Too smoothly for Madison's plans. She needed chaos, conflict, something to work with. I saw her growing increasingly agitated as the afternoon wore on. She started making more pointed comments, trying to provoke a reaction, but I deflected each one with practiced ease. Finally, Madison decided to force the issue. She accidentally knocked over a pitcher of punch, soaking my dress. Her friends gasped, waiting for my reaction. I simply laughed, made a joke about needing to cool off anyway, and went to change. I heard Madison's frustrated sigh as I walked away. When I returned in fresh clothes, it was time for cake. I carried it out myself, singing along with a happy birthday chorus. Madison blew out her candles, still looking for an opportunity to create drama. That's when she noticed something different about the cake. Written in elegant frosting were the words, "Happy birthday, Madison. May you always get what you deserve." It was perfectly innocent on the surface, but Madison understood the deeper meaning. Her face flushed as her friends complimented the message, calling it sweet and thoughtful. The party ended without the dramatic confrontation Madison had planned. Parents collected their children, thanking me for hosting such a lovely event. Madison stood in the doorway, forced to smile and accept compliments about her wonderful stepmother. Each word of praise was a small victory for me. After the guests left, Madison cornered me in the kitchen. Her mask finally dropped completely, revealing the calculating coldness underneath. She hissed threats, promised to destroy my marriage, swore she'd make me regret ever entering her life. I continued loading the dishwasher, humming softly. Andrew walked in just as Madison raised her voice. But instead of seeing her threats, he saw me ignoring his distressed daughter. Madison immediately switched to tears, running to her room with a dramatic sob. Andrew followed, shooting me a look of disappointment that cut deeper than Madison's threats. That night, I found a note from Sophie hidden in my pillowcase. It contained a single line that made my blood run cold. "Saturday night, be careful. Lock your door." Madison had given up on provocation. She was moving to her final plan, the one she'd been saving, the one that would destroy everything once and for all. Sophie's warning consumed my thoughts as I lay awake. Madison had abandoned manipulation for something more direct, more devastating. I spent hours running scenarios through my mind, trying to anticipate her next move. The house creaked in the darkness, each sound making me wonder if she was already implementing her plan. The next morning brought an eerie calm. Madison emerged from her room with a pleasant demeanor, helping herself to breakfast without complaint. She even cleaned up after herself, wiping down the counter with exaggerated care. Andrew noticed the change and smiled, clearly believing his daughter was making an effort. I recognized the performance for what it was, the calm before the storm. Sophie avoided eye contact at breakfast, her hands trembling slightly as she ate. Whatever Madison had planned, Sophie knew about it, and she was terrified. I wanted to reassure her, but Madison watched our every interaction with sharp eyes. Any sign of alliance between Sophie and me would trigger immediate retaliation. Andrew announced he had a conference that weekend. He'd be gone for 2 nights. Madison's eyes lit up, though she quickly masked her excitement. The timing couldn't be coincidental. She'd been waiting for an opportunity when Andrew wouldn't be around to interfere or witness whatever she had planned. I considered canceling my own commitments to avoid being alone with Madison, but that would look suspicious. Besides, running would only delay the inevitable. Madison had proven she could wait, could plan, could execute her schemes with terrifying patience. Better to face whatever was coming on my own terms. That afternoon, I discovered Madison had been in my home office. Papers were subtly rearranged. My computer screen showed recent activity. I checked the browser history and found searches for divorce lawyers, apartment rentals, even dating sites. all designed to look like I was planning to leave Andrew. Madison was building a narrative that I was the one destroying the family. I cleared the history and changed all my passwords, but the damage was done. Madison would have taken screenshots, saved evidence of my supposed betrayal. Combined with the fake texts in her diary entries, she was painting a picture of a stepmother who had never truly wanted this family. The sophistication of her plan was both impressive and terrifying. Sophie left me a final note, hidden inside a book I'd been reading. It simply read, "Saturday night, be careful. Lock your door." The brevity spoke volumes about her fear. Whatever Madison planned for Andrew's absence, Sophie believed it was dangerous enough to warrant a direct warning, despite the risk to herself. Friday arrived with Andrew packing for his conference. Madison helped him carry his bags to the car, playing the devoted daughter. She hugged him goodbye, holding on longer than usual. I watched from the window as she whispered something in his ear. His expression grew serious, and he glanced back at the house before driving away. That evening, Madison ordered pizza for dinner, insisting on treating everyone. She chatted pleasantly about school, her friends even asked about my work. Sophie barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate with mechanical movements. The forced normalcy was suffocating, like being trapped in a play where only Madison knew the script. After dinner, Madison suggested watching a movie together, a family bonding activity. She let me choose, settling onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn. Sophie excused herself, claiming homework, but I caught her meaningful glance as she headed upstairs. The warning was clear. Don't trust this sudden friendliness. Halfway through the movie, Madison paused it to make more popcorn. I heard her moving around the kitchen, cabinet doors opening and closing. When she returned, she handed me a fresh bowl and settled back into her spot. Something felt off about the gesture. Too considerate. Too normal for our dynamic. The movie resumed, but I found myself growing drowsy. My eyelids felt heavy, my limbs sluggish. Alarm bells rang in my mind as I recognized the sensation. Madison had put something in the popcorn, probably crushed sleeping pills from the medicine cabinet. I forced myself to stay alert, letting my head droop as if succumbing to sleep. Madison waited another 20 minutes before testing my response. She called my name softly, then louder. I remained still, breathing deeply and evenly. Satisfied, she got up and headed to my bedroom. I heard drawers opening, items being moved. She was searching for something specific. I gave her a few more minutes before following silently. From the hallway, I watched her rifling through my jewelry box. The one she'd scattered before. But this time she wasn't looking for valuables to steal. She pulled out a small velvet pouch I'd hidden in the bottom. The one containing Andrew's first wife's wedding ring, which he'd given me for safekeeping. Madison pocketed the ring and moved to my closet. She retrieved the dress she'd worn to prom, the one I'd returned to my closet after wearing it. She laid it carefully on the bed, then pulled out a pair of scissors. I watched in fascination as she began cutting the dress into ribbons, each slice deliberate and violent. The plan became chillingly clear. She would claim I'd stolen her mother's ring out of jealousy, then destroyed the prom dress in a rage. Combined with the browser history and fake texts, it would paint me as an unstable woman bent on erasing Andrew's first marriage. The sleeping pills ensured I'd have no alibi, no memory of the evening's events. But Madison had made a crucial error. She'd underestimated my caution around her. She didn't know I barely touched the popcorn. I slipped back to the living room, resuming my position on the couch. Let her complete her setup. The security footage from the pawn shop still waited in my drawer. My own insurance against her lies. Madison worked for another hour, creating her twisted crime scene. I heard her in various rooms, planting evidence, staging the narrative she'd crafted. Finally, she returned to the living room to check on me one more time. Satisfied I was unconscious, she headed upstairs to wait for morning, when she could discover the destruction and call Andrew in hysterics. I waited until the house settled into silence before moving. First, I retrieved my phone and began documenting everything. The destroyed dress on my bed. The missing ring. The scissors Madison had conveniently left behind, my fingerprints already on them from when I'd used them days ago. Every single piece of her carefully constructed frame-up. Then I went to work on my own plan. I gathered the prom dress remnants and the scissors, placing them in a bag. I retrieved the security footage disc and Sophie's notes from their hiding spot. In the kitchen, I found the pizza box in the trash and photographed the receipt, paid for with Madison's credit card, her signature on the slip. The medicine cabinet showed a bottle of sleeping pills with several missing. I photographed that, too, along with the residue in the bottom of the popcorn bowl Madison had given me. Each piece of evidence built a counter-narrative to her lies. But I needed something more. Something that would definitively prove Madison's guilt. I crept upstairs to Madison's room. Her door was closed but not locked. She was confident in her plan, certain I was drugged into unconsciousness. I entered silently, using my phone's flashlight to navigate. There on her desk lay her real journal. The one Sophie had mentioned, where Madison documented her schemes. The latest entry was dated that very evening. In her own handwriting she detailed the entire plan. The sleeping pills, the staged destruction, even the specific phrases she would use when calling Andrew tomorrow. She'd written about her ultimate goal, forcing me out of the family, making Andrew choose between his daughter and his wife, knowing he'd never abandon his child. I photographed every single page, careful not to disturb anything. Madison stirred in her sleep and I froze. But she merely rolled over and continued breathing deeply. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding, clutching the evidence that would expose her once and for all. Back in my room I worked quickly. I rehung the destroyed dress in Madison's closet carefully. The scissors? Placed in her desk drawer. The wedding ring went back in my jewelry box. I cleaned up any trace of her staging, returning everything to its proper place. By dawn, it would be as if her plan had never existed, except for the digital evidence on my phone. I settled back on the couch, pretending to sleep as the sun began to rise. Madison emerged from her room around 7 a.m., moving quietly downstairs. I heard her pause in confusion at finding me still on the couch, instead of in my bed where she'd staged the scene. She went to check my room, and I heard her sharp intake of breath at finding everything normal. She searched frantically for the destroyed dress, the missing ring, any sign of her carefully planned evidence. But everything had vanished. She returned to the living room, staring at me with a mixture of confusion and growing panic. I stirred naturally, stretching and yawning as if just waking up. Madison tried to recover, asking how I'd slept, if I remembered anything strange from last night. I smiled pleasantly, mentioning how the movie had been relaxing, how nice it was to have a quiet evening together. Her face paled. She realized her plan had somehow failed, but she couldn't figure out how. Sophie appeared for breakfast, relief flooding her features when she saw me acting normally. She'd spent the night terrified of what she might find in the morning. Madison kept shooting suspicious glances between us, trying to determine if we'd somehow collaborated, but Sophie's genuine surprise at the normal morning scene convinced her otherwise. Andrew called to check in from his conference. Madison lunged for the phone, but I answered first, chatting warmly about our peaceful evening. I passed the phone to Madison, watching her struggle to sound normal. She couldn't report the dramatic discovery she'd planned, because there was nothing to discover. Her frame-up had vanished like smoke. The rest of the weekend passed in intense confusion for Madison. She searched the house repeatedly, looking for any trace of her plan. She checked the trash, the garage, even the garden shed. But I'd been thorough. The evidence of her scheme now existed only in digital form on my phone, backed up to a cloud service she couldn't access. Sophie grew bolder as Madison's confusion deepened. She started spending more time in common areas, even sitting with me for meals. Madison was too distracted to threaten her, too focused on understanding how her perfect plan had unraveled. The power dynamic in the house shifted subtly but significantly. Andrew returned Sunday evening to find a peculiar scene. Madison sullen and withdrawn, Sophie relaxed and chatting with me about a school project, and me preparing his favorite dinner. He'd expected drama, based on whatever Madison had whispered before he left. Instead, he found unexpected harmony. Over the following days, Madison's behavior became increasingly erratic. She couldn't accuse me of anything because doing so would reveal her own plan. She couldn't explain the missing sleeping pills without admitting to drugging me. She couldn't mention the destroyed dress or stolen ring because they showed no signs of damage or theft. Her own trap had snapped shut on her. I waited a full week before making my move. Andrew had noticed Madison's strange behavior, Her jumpiness, her constant searching for something she couldn't name. When he asked what was wrong, she could only stammer about bad dreams and stress. The confident manipulator had become paranoid and uncertain. One evening, I suggested family counseling. Not accusingly, but with genuine concern for Madison's obvious distress. Andrew agreed immediately, worried about his daughter's sudden change. Madison couldn't refuse without seeming unreasonable. She was trapped by her own need to appear innocent. The counselor was a pleasant woman who specialized in blended families. During our third session, she asked about trust and honesty within our household. That's when I mentioned feeling concerned about some things I discovered. I produced printed screenshots of Madison's journal entries. Her detailed plans to frame me, to drug me, to destroy property. Madison went white as the counselor read through the evidence. Andrew's face cycled through disbelief, then recognition, and finally deep, painful disappointment. The security footage from the pawn shop sealed it. There was Madison selling my grandmother's ring, counting the cash with satisfaction. Her own words, her own actions, all documented and undeniable. The session exploded into chaos. Madison tried denying, then justifying, then blaming me for invading her privacy. But the counselor kept bringing the focus back to Madison's choices, her calculated cruelty, her attempts to destroy her father's marriage. Andrew sat in stunned silence, seeing his daughter clearly for perhaps the first time. Sophie surprised everyone by speaking up, confirming incidents she'd witnessed, manipulation she'd been forced to participate in. Her quiet voice carried more weight than any accusation. She was tired of being afraid, tired of enabling her sister's behavior. The counselor praised her courage, while Madison glared with undisguised fury. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Andrew finally understood the depth of Madison's deception, the months of manipulation he'd enabled. He apologized to me with tears in his eyes, not just for doubting me but for failing to see what his daughter had become. The pain in his voice was genuine. A father realizing he'd been blind to his child's capacity for cruelty. Madison was given a choice: intensive therapy and behavioral modification, or living with her mother full-time. She chose her mother, unable to face the consequences of her actions being known. As she packed her belongings, she maintained her defiant attitude, but I saw fear underneath. Fear that her games wouldn't work anymore, that people would see through her facades. Sophie chose to stay. Finally free from her sister's influence, our relationship bloomed without Madison's poison. She showed me the places Madison had hidden things, revealed secrets she'd been forced to keep. We developed an easy companionship, built on mutual respect, and the shared survival of Madison's reign of terror. Andrew struggled with guilt and grief over Madison's departure, but he also found relief in the peace that descended on our home. No more walking on eggshells. No more mysterious incidents. No more choosing between his daughter's lies and his wife's truth. He threw himself into rebuilding our marriage with determination. The pawn shop ring was never recovered, but Andrew commissioned a new piece, using stones from both our families. It wasn't a replacement but a fresh start, a symbol of surviving trial by fire. When he presented it to me on a quiet evening 3 months later, we both cried for what was lost and what was preserved. Madison visited occasionally, supervised and brief. She'd learned to moderate her behavior around others, but the calculating coldness remained in her eyes. Sophie refused to be alone with her, and I maintained careful boundaries. Andrew supported these limits, finally understanding they were necessary protections, not cruel exclusions. Our home transformed from a battlefield to a sanctuary. Sophie flourished without her sister's shadow, developing her own interests and friendships. Andrew and I rediscovered the connection that had brought us together. We'd survived Madison's war, scarred but stronger. Our bond tested and proven. The greatest victory wasn't in exposing Madison's schemes or forcing her departure. It was in refusing to let her poison destroy our capacity for trust and love. We'd learned hard lessons about manipulation and the importance of boundaries. But we'd also learned that truth, patience, and courage could triumph over lies and cruelty. I kept Madison's journal entries and the security footage, insurance against future attempts. She was clever enough to know I held proof of her past actions, smart enough not to risk exposure. An uneasy truce settled between us. enforced by a mutual understanding of consequences. Sophie graduated with honors, free to achieve without sabotage. Andrew walked her across the stage with pride, uncomplicated by family drama. Madison attended, sitting with her mother, watching the family she'd tried to destroy celebrate without her. The look on her face was worth every moment of pain she'd caused. Life settled into rhythms of normal joy and challenge. Work deadlines, family dinners, weekend trips, quiet evenings reading together. The ordinary paradise Madison had tried to steal through extraordinary cruelty. We'd earned this peace through surviving her war, and we treasured it accordingly. Looking back, I understood Madison had taught me valuable lessons about the importance of documentation, the power of patience, the necessity of protecting yourself even from family. She'd been my unwitting teacher in psychological warfare, and I'd graduated with honors. The student had ultimately surpassed the master. Our family story wasn't a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real-life victory over a genuine threat. We'd faced a master manipulator and won through truth, evidence, and refusing to abandon each other. Madison had gambled everything on dividing us and lost, because she underestimated the power of united resistance. The ring might be gone forever, sold for a prom dress and teenage vanity, but what I'd gained was worth so much more. A family forged in truth. A marriage tested and proven. A stepdaughter who chose courage over compliance. Madison had tried to steal my life and instead taught me how to fight for it. Some battles aren't won through grand gestures, but through small acts of documentation, patience, and strategic thinking. Madison had been brilliant in her cruelty, but she'd failed to account for one thing: that her victims might learn from her methods and turn them against her. In the end, her greatest creation was the opponent who would defeat her. What do you think? Have you ever had to fight a war in your own home? I really want to know what you would have done.